I'd been in the Army Rangers for 10 years when everything changed. Afghanistan, Iraq, 3 different regions in Africa. I'd followed orders, completed missions, and came home with everyone I was responsible for. Until 2014, when Colonel Clay Morgan pulled me into his office at Fort Benning. Hanson. He didn't look up from the folder on his desk. Your record's impressive. Thank you, sir. I stood at attention, eyes fixed on the wall behind him. At ease. He closed the folder and finally looked at me. I'm transferring you to a specialized task force, classification level above your current clearance. I blinked. May I ask what this is about, sir? You may not. Morgan pushed a sealed envelope across his desk. Your new orders. Report to Airfield Charlie at 600 tomorrow, pack for extended deployment in mountainous terrain. And just like that, my normal military career ended. The next morning I met my new team, 6 Rangers who looked as confused as I felt about our sudden reassignment. Staff Sergeant Elijah Mills nodded at me when I approached. Raymond Hanson, right? Heard good things. Thanks. Any idea what we're doing here? I dropped my bag next to the others. Nope, just got pulled from my unit yesterday. He pointed to the others. That's Corporal Griffin, Specialist Oliver, PFC Sims, Specialist Walker, and Ramsey's our medic. Bobby Griffin gave me a quick wave while checking his gear. James Oliver looked up from his radio equipment with a silent nod. Jerry Sims, young with a face that looked barely old enough to shave, was busy sorting ammunition. Alex Walker was organizing his pack with what looked like color-coded tags. Tammy Ramsey was the only one who walked over to introduce herself. Glad to have another experienced pair of hands, she said, shaking mine firmly. Most of these guys haven't seen as many deployments as you. Before I could respond, the hangar door opened and Major Thomas Chandler walked in. Everyone snapped to attention. At ease, he said, his voice raspy. I'll make this quick. We're wheels up in 20 minutes for a search and rescue in Afghanistan. A 12-man squad went dark 4 days ago while investigating insurgent activity near a village called Kashar. Chandler unfolded a map on a nearby crate. Captain Miles Rios and his men were tracking weapons movements. Their last transmission mentioned unusual activity in the village, then nothing. No distress call, no extraction request. Rules of engagement, sir? Mills asked. Standard ROE applies, but I want to emphasize this is a rescue mission first. We find our people and get out. Questions? I raised my hand. Intel on the village? Chandler nodded to a woman I hadn't noticed standing near the wall. She stepped forward, dark hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. Mary Burgess, Intelligence. Kashar is a remote settlement, population approximately 200. Mostly farmers, herders. No significant Taliban presence reported in the last 8 months. The village sits in a valley surrounded by these ridges. She traced her finger along contour lines on the map. Minimal strategic value, which is why Rios's interest in the area raised flags. I studied the map, memorizing the terrain. The village looked isolated. One road in, same road out, surrounded by mountains. Not an easy place to disappear without a trace. 16 hours later, our helicopter touched down 2 miles from Kashar. The pilot wouldn't go closer. Standard protocol for villages without confirmed friendly status. As we jumped out into the late afternoon heat, I felt something I couldn't explain. Not the usual pre-mission adrenaline or focus, but a cold, crawling sensation up my back. You okay? Mills asked as we moved away from the helicopter. Yeah, I adjusted my pack. Just got a weird feeling about this one. He laughed. You say that every time. But I didn't. That was the thing. I'd never said that before. We moved in standard formation through rocky terrain. The sun hung low behind the mountains as we approached the village, casting long shadows across our path. Griffin took point, with Oliver handling communications, checking in with base every 30 minutes. Walker and Sims covered our flanks while Ramsey stayed center with her medical gear. Mills and I brought up the rear, scanning for any movement. "Coming up on Kashar," Griffin's voice came through my earpiece. "Visual in 2 minutes." As we crested the final ridge, the village came into view below us. Mud brick buildings, narrow streets, a small square with what looked like a well or water source. But even from a distance, something felt wrong. "Where is everyone?" Sims asked. Mills pulled out his binoculars. "I count maybe 5-6 people moving around. Rest must be indoors." "Intel said 200 residents," I reminded him. "It's dusk, not midnight. People should be out finishing daily work, cooking dinner, something." Ramsey moved up beside me. "Could be a local holiday? Or maybe they saw Rios's team and got spooked." We approached cautiously, weapons ready but not aimed. The few villagers we could see stopped whatever they were doing and watched us. No one ran. No one called out warnings. They just watched. An old man herding 3 skinny goats stood motionless as we passed. His white beard reached his chest, his dark eyes following our movement without blinking. "Hello," Mills said in Pashto. "We're looking for American soldiers. Have you seen them?" The old man didn't respond for so long I thought he might not have heard. Then he slowly shook his head and pointed toward the center of the village. "What's your name?" I asked him in Pashto. "Dominic Rose," he answered in heavily accented English, which surprised me. He said nothing more, just continued staring. We moved deeper into the village. Most houses stood empty, doors open to the cooling evening air. No cooking fires, no voices from inside. A man in a shop doorway watched us pass. The shelves behind him held basic supplies, flour, oil, some tools. But the shop felt abandoned despite his presence. "Hello?" Mills tried again. "American soldiers, have you seen them?" The shopkeeper, Everett Lopez, according to the hand-painted sign, shook his head slowly. "No Americans," he said, his English better than the old man's. "You should go." "We can't leave without our men," Mills explained. 12 soldiers. They were here looking for weapons. Lopez's expression never changed. "No Americans," he repeated. "No weapons. You should go." As we reached the village center, I noticed a hunched woman standing near the well. Her gray hair poked out from beneath a traditional headscarf, her hands clutching a clay pot. She stared at us with the same blank expression as the others. I approached her carefully. "Ma'am, we're looking for—" She backed away before I could finish, muttering something under her breath. I caught only fragments in a mix of Pashto and Dari. Something about the deep places, and they always return. I later learned from our translator that her name was Casey Schneider, though I never understood how a woman with a name like that ended up in a remote Afghan village. Like the others, her face showed no fear, no anger, no curiosity, just empty, patient watching. "This isn't right," I whispered to Mills. "Where's the rest of the village, and where the hell is Rios's team?" "Let's do a building-by-building search," he decided. "Stay in radio contact, groups of 2. As the team split up to begin searching, I couldn't shake the feeling that the villagers knew exactly where our missing soldiers were. And worse, that they were waiting for us to find out for ourselves. We broke formation, weapons ready. Griffin fell in behind me as we headed toward a cluster of mud brick homes. The dirt roads were hard-packed from years of foot traffic, but I noticed something odd as we approached the central square. Dark stains in the dirt. Not engine oil, blood. I followed the trail to a small wooden cart that sat abandoned near a market stall. The smell hit me first, that unmistakable copper-sweet reek of death. I lifted the canvas covering with my rifle barrel. A hand. Just a hand severed cleanly at the wrist, a captain's insignia ring still on the finger. "Griffin," I called, my voice steadier than I felt. "Get Chandler." I didn't need to check dog tags to know who it belonged to. Captain Miles Rios had that ring custom-made after our second tour in Afghanistan. Griffin ran to find Chandler while I secured the area, keeping civilians away. Not that any were trying to get close. They knew what was here. When Chandler arrived, his face hardened. "Rios?" I nodded. "Keep looking," he said. The next hour moved in a blur of horror. We found more pieces. A leg behind the schoolhouse, a torso in a shed, more parts arranged in what looked almost like displays. All American soldiers, all butchered with clean, precise cuts. The radio crackled. "Hanson, get to the mosque, now!" Chandler's voice sounded tight, controlled. I jogged across the village, past the empty-eyed stares of the remaining villagers. The mosque stood at the far end of the settlement, a modest building with a small minaret, its white walls bright in the sunlight. Inside, the cool air smelled of incense and copper. My team stood in a circle, looking down. I pushed through and stopped cold. Body parts, dozens of them arranged in geometric patterns on the floor of the mosque. Stars and circles formed from limbs, heads placed at specific points in the design. "Jesus," I whispered. "All 12, Chandler said. "We've accounted for every member of Rios's squad." The cuts were wrong. I'd seen combat deaths. I'd seen explosions tear men apart. This was different. The edges of the flesh were smooth, the bone cut straight. No tearing, no jagged edges. "These aren't battlefield injuries," I said, kneeling to look closer without touching anything. "Look at the precision. These cuts were made with surgical tools." Oliver turned away and vomited in the corner. "Sir," Sims called from behind the small altar at the front of the mosque. "You need to see this." We moved toward him, careful not to disturb the grisly display on the floor. Sims had pushed aside a heavy rug, revealing a stone trap door set into the floor. "It was hidden," he said, "but I noticed the rug didn't sit flat." Chandler looked at the opening, then at me. "Get it open." I shook my head. "Sir, we need to call this in first. We found Rios and his men. Whatever's down there can wait until we get reinforcements and proper equipment." "That wasn't a suggestion, Hanson." Chandler's voice was ice. "Open it." I knew that tone. I'd served under him long enough to know when there was no point arguing. Sims and I worked the heavy stone lid aside, revealing a narrow set of stairs carved into the earth, disappearing into darkness. Cool air wafted up from below, carrying the smell of damp stone and something else I couldn't place. "Sir, we don't know what's down there," I tried one more time. "At minimum, we should wait for daylight. Bring lights, proper—" "We have lights," Chandler cut me off, pulling a tactical flashlight from his gear. "I want to know what happened to my men, now." He went first, followed by Walker. I glanced at Griffin, whose face looked as troubled as I felt, then followed them down. The stairs descended about 20 feet before leveling out into a tunnel tall enough to stand in. The walls were smooth stone, clearly man-made and old. Very old. Chandler's light swept the passage, revealing branching corridors. "This runs under the whole village," Walker murmured. The walls were covered in markings, symbols carved into the stone, row after row of them. I ran my fingers over one set, feeling the deep grooves. "What language is this?" Griffin asked beside me. "Not Arabic," I said, "not anything I recognize." Later, after we made it home, Nathan Cooper from Intelligence would spend weeks with photos of these carvings. Pre-Islamic, he'd tell me, his eyes bright with academic excitement. Possibly Sumerian in origin, some of these symbols date back over 5,000 years. But in that moment, all I knew was they looked wrong. unnatural shapes that made my eyes hurt if I looked at them too long. We followed the main passage, marking our path with light sticks. The tunnel system was extensive, with chambers branching off the main corridor. Most were empty save for more carvings, but in some we found evidence of recent use. Modern tools, electric lanterns, food wrappers. The tunnel widened into a large circular chamber about 100 yards in. Chandler entered first, his light revealing what waited for us. Bodies. Not American soldiers this time, villagers. They lay in perfect concentric circles around a stone pedestal in the center of the room. Men, women, some in traditional clothes, others in modern dress. Unlike the soldiers above, these bodies were intact. Their faces looked peaceful, as if they'd lain down and simply decided to die. "Check for pulses," Chandler ordered, though we all knew they were long dead. I moved among them, kneeling to touch cold wrists and necks. No signs of violence, no blood, just bodies arranged with mathematical precision around the central pedestal. The stone pillar stood about waist high, its surface smooth except for a shallow basin carved into the top. I shined my light into it, seeing dried brown stains that could only be blood. "Sir," I called to Chandler, "I think they were sacrificed." Chandler moved to my side, examining the pedestal. "For what purpose?" I didn't have an answer, but as we continued exploring the tunnels, moving deeper into the complex, a feeling grew in my gut. A crawling dread that made my skin prickle. The walls seemed to press closer, the symbols watching us as we passed. I kept thinking about those bodies in their perfect circles, and the dismembered soldiers arranged in patterns above us. Whatever had happened here wasn't random violence or insurgent activity. It was ritual, purpose. And as we pushed further into the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being drawn towards something that had been waiting for us all along. The attack came without warning. We'd been standing in the chamber for less than 5 minutes, our tactical lights cutting weak cones through the dust-filled air. The space opened about 20 feet in each direction, with rough stone walls and a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above our lights. Major Chandler had just started assigning search patterns when I caught movement at the edge of my beam. "Contact," I said, swinging my light toward it. But whatever I'd seen had already moved. The darkness seemed to flow around our lights rather than be pierced by them. Walker's position was to my right, about 10 feet away. I heard his breathing change, quick and shallow, like he'd spotted something that scared him. "You see that?" he whispered. Before I could answer, something dark shot across the floor between us. Not an animal or a person, but something else. Like a piece of the darkness itself had broken free. Walker's tactical light jerked wildly as he spun to track it. "What the f—" His words cut off as his body lurched backward toward one of the tunnels branching off the chamber. His boots scraped against the stone floor as he fought against whatever was pulling him. "Walker!" I shouted, lunging toward him. His rifle came up and he fired 3 wild shots that lit the chamber in strobing flashes. The sound crashed against the stone walls, temporarily deafening me. In those split-second bursts of light, I caught a glimpse of something wrapped around his legs, something that looked like stretched shadow. Then he was gone, yanked into the side tunnel so fast I barely saw him move. "Man down!" Mills yelled from somewhere to my left. "What's got him?" Chandler's voice cut through the chaos. "Form up, back to back!" We scrambled into a defensive circle, our lights pointed outward. Griffin pressed his back against mine, his breathing heavy in my ear. "Did you see it?" he asked. "No," I said, scanning the darkness. "Not really." Mills took charge while Chandler radioed for backup. "We need to pull out now." We moved as a unit toward the tunnel we'd entered through. I kept my light sweeping the ground, watching for any sign of that shadow thing. The mouth of our exit tunnel looked different somehow. Narrower than I remembered. "This isn't right," Oliver said, shining his light up at the entrance. "This isn't the way we came in." "It has to be," Mills insisted. "There's no other exit on this side." But Oliver was right. The tunnel entrance had changed. So had the others around the chamber. Where there had been 5 distinct passageways, now I counted 7, each identical to the next. "The hell is going on?" Griffin whispered. "Everyone stay calm," Chandler said, lowering his radio. "No response from topside. We're on our own until we get closer to the surface." We tried each tunnel in turn. Some led to dead ends. Others curved back to the main chamber. Time stretched as we searched, our movements growing more frantic with each failed attempt. "We need to mark these," I suggested, pulling out a can of spray paint from my pack. I marked each tunnel we tried with a number. An hour passed, then 2. Our comms remained dead. The tunnels seemed to change behind us. Markings disappeared or showed up on passages we hadn't explored yet. Griffin was the next to go. We'd stopped to rest, conserving our light batteries, when I heard a scraping sound above us. Griffin looked up, raising his light toward the ceiling. "There's something—" His words cut off as he rose into the air, his boots leaving the ground. I grabbed for his leg but missed. He didn't scream, just made a short, choked sound as he disappeared into the darkness above. His light fell, shattering on the stone floor. "Pull back," Chandler ordered, but there was nowhere to go. Oliver fell next. We were moving through one of the tunnels when the shadows on the wall beside him moved. Not like they should when a light source shifts, but like they were pulling away from the wall itself. "Look out!" I shouted. Oliver turned, raising his weapon, but the darkness flowed over him like water. His light spun as he dropped it, creating wild patterns across the walls as it rolled. When the beam settled, he was gone. Just gone. Ramsey, our medic, lasted until hour 5. Chandler had taken a fall, gashing his leg on a sharp rock. While she worked to bandage him, I saw the darkness behind her grow deeper, more solid. "Ramsey, move!" I yelled. She turned, medical kit in hand, and then simply dissolved into the blackness. One moment she was there, the next she wasn't. No struggle, no sound, just gone. Chandler didn't make it another 20 minutes after that. By hour 6, I was alone. My rifle was empty. I'd fired at shadows until I had nothing left. My last flare had burned out 30 minutes earlier. The batteries in my tactical light flickered, growing weaker with every step. I stumbled through the tunnels, one hand on the wall to guide me. The stone beneath my fingers seemed to shift and move, the texture changing from rough to smooth and back again. The tunnels were reshaping themselves around me. When my light finally died, I kept moving in the darkness. There was nothing else to do. I counted steps, trying to maintain my sense of direction, but it was useless. The darkness was absolute. Then ahead of me, I saw a faint blue glow. I moved toward it, my legs aching with exhaustion. The tunnel opened into a chamber unlike the others, perfectly round, with a domed ceiling carved with symbols I didn't recognize. In the center sat a young girl, cross-legged on the stone floor. Her white dress seemed to glow in the strange blue light that had no visible source. Her black hair hung straight past her shoulders, and her skin looked unnaturally smooth. She looked up as I entered, fixing me with eyes that reflected no light. Just 2 dark pools that seemed to go on forever. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice rough from hours of shouting for my team. "Jessica Casey," she said, her voice sounding both childlike and ancient at the same time. I stared back at her, unable to process what I was seeing. A child, alone, hundreds of feet underground in a place where my entire team had vanished. Her head tilted slightly as she studied me. Then she spoke a single word: Harbinger. The moment the word left her lips, I felt the stone beneath my feet shudder. Dust rained down from above as cracks spread across the ceiling. The tunnels were collapsing. I lunged toward the girl, but the floor between us split open. The blue light vanished, plunging me back into darkness as the world fell apart around me. Stone crashed down, and I felt myself falling. Then nothing. I woke up to the sound of beeping machines and the smell of antiseptic. My eyes felt glued shut, and when I finally got them open, the fluorescent lights above my hospital bed stabbed into my brain like ice picks. A nurse noticed I was awake and called for a doctor. Within minutes, I learned I was in Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany, and that I'd been unconscious for 2 weeks. "What happened?" I asked, my voice a dry croak. "How did I get here?" The doctor, a woman with tired eyes and a German accent, told me I'd been found wandering near a small village in northern Afghanistan, dehydrated and suffering from a concussion. I had no memory of escaping those tunnels. 3 days later, a man in a dark suit walked into my room without knocking. He was heavy-set with thinning blonde hair and cold blue eyes that assessed me like I was a piece of equipment rather than a person. "Sergeant Hansen," he said. "I'm Jimmy Hamilton, Department of Defense." I tried to sit up straighter, wincing at the pain in my ribs. "Sir." He pulled a chair next to my bed and sat down, placing a leather portfolio on his lap. "I need to ask you some questions about what happened." I nodded, ready to give my report. "We were sent to Kashar to find Miles Rios and his missing squad." Hamilton held up his hand, stopping me. "There's been no task force sent to any village called Kashar, Sergeant." I stared at him, thinking I'd misheard. "What?" "No, sir. We were sent there 2 weeks ago. Major Chandler led the team. We had intel that—" "Sergeant Hansen," Hamilton cut in, his voice flat. "There was no mission to Kashar, no task force. You were found alone, suffering from head trauma and exposure." The machines beside me beeped faster as my heart rate climbed. "That's not right. Ask Major Chandler or Griffin, Mills, Oliver, they were all there. We found tunnels under the village. Something attacked us." Hamilton opened his portfolio and removed several files. "Raymond, I need you to look at these." He handed me the first file. Inside was a death certificate for Bobby Griffin, killed by an IED in Kandahar province. The date was 3 years ago. "This is wrong," I said, pushing the paper away. "Griffin was with me 2 weeks ago. I talked to him that morning." Hamilton handed me another file. Elijah Mills, killed in a helicopter crash near Bagram 2.5 years ago. Then James Oliver, shot by a sniper in Helmand province. 19 months ago, Jerry Sims, killed in a training accident at Fort Bragg. 14 months ago, Tammy Ramsey, vehicle rollover in Iraq. 10 months ago, and finally Thomas Chandler, heart attack while stationed at Fort Benning. 6 months ago. "This isn't right," I said, my voice breaking. "I was with them. We were together in Kashar. This is some kind of mistake." "You've had a traumatic experience, Sergeant," Hamilton said, collecting the files. "Your medical records show you sustained a serious head injury. Memory issues are common with concussions." "I know what I saw," I insisted. "Check the mission logs. Talk to Mary Burgess in intelligence, she briefed us. Or Colonel Morgan, he assigned me to the team." "I'll look into it," Hamilton said, but his tone made it clear he was just humoring me. "In the meantime, focus on your recovery." After Hamilton left, I lay in bed trying to make sense of what he'd told me. It was impossible. I remembered every detail of our mission. The heat of the sun on my neck as we searched the village. The dust in the air as we entered the tunnels, the blue light. The girl. It couldn't all be in my head. The next day, a woman with short black hair and rectangular glasses came to see me. She introduced herself as Dr. Lexi Calhoun, a psychiatrist. "Mr. Hamilton asked me to evaluate you," she said, her voice warm but professional. "It's Sergeant Hansen," I corrected her. She made a note on her clipboard. "Tell me about Kashar, Raymond." I told her everything. From Colonel Morgan assigning me to the team, to finding the tunnels, to seeing that girl with her strange blue eyes right before the floor collapsed. Dr. Calhoun listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. "And you have no memory of how you got out of the tunnels?" she asked when I finished. "No," I admitted. "But that doesn't mean it didn't happen. The rest of my team, your team members died in separate incidents over the past 3 years, Raymond," she said gently. "I've reviewed all their files myself." "That's not possible," I said, my jaw tight. "I was with them 2 weeks ago." Dr. Calhoun looked at me with sympathy. "What you're experiencing is consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder. Your mind has created an alternate narrative to cope with the trauma you've experienced. So you think I made up the entire mission? The village? The tunnels? That girl? I think your brain is trying to make sense of fragmented memories and experiences," she said. "It's filling in gaps with a narrative that feels coherent to you." I shook my head. "You're wrong. Raymond, I'm recommending your medical discharge from the Army," she said. "You need time and proper treatment to process what's happened to you." I stopped arguing. What was the point? They'd already decided I was crazy. 2 months later, I packed my bags and headed to northern Montana. I'd bought a small cabin 50 miles from the nearest town, using the money from my military pension and disability payments. If no one was going to believe me, I might as well go somewhere I wouldn't have to deal with people. The cabin sat on 20 acres of pine forest with mountains rising in the distance. No close neighbors, poor cell service, and long winters that kept most people away. Perfect for someone who wanted to be left alone. Perfect for someone who didn't trust the government anymore. I spent the first year fixing up the cabin, patching the roof, reinforcing the walls, installing a better wood stove. Physical labor helped keep the nightmares at bay. At night, I'd sit on the porch with a bottle of whiskey, watching the stars and wondering what really happened in those tunnels. I kept one connection to my old life. Kingston Bush, an intelligence analyst I'd worked with years before. He believed enough of my story to help me, or at least he pretended to. Every few months, a package would arrive at my P.O. box in town. Reports of unexplained disappearances from around the world. Strange phenomena that never made the mainstream news. Anything that might connect to what I saw in Kashar. "There's a pattern here," Bush wrote in one of his notes. "People vanishing in remote locations, no bodies, no evidence, just gone." I turned my spare bedroom into what some might call a crazy person's den. Maps covered the walls with red pins marking disappearances. Newspaper clippings filled folders organized by date and location. String-connected related events. If anyone had seen it, they would have thought I'd lost my mind completely. Maybe I had, but I knew what I saw. I knew my team had been real, and I was going to find out what happened to them even if it took the rest of my life. 4 years into my self-imposed exile, I started taking classes at the community college in town. Ancient languages, Sumerian, Akkadian, Proto-Sinitic. The symbols I'd seen in those tunnels had looked familiar somehow, and I needed to understand why. Professor Madison Morales was in her 50s, with silver-streaked auburn hair and vintage cat-eye glasses. She looked more like someone's eccentric aunt than an expert in dead languages, but her knowledge was incredible. "You're making remarkable progress, Raymond," she told me after class one evening. "Most students take years to get where you are in months. What's driving you?" I gave her the same answer I gave everyone who asked why a retired Army Ranger was studying ancient scripts. "Just a hobby to keep my mind sharp." She didn't believe me. I could tell by the way she looked at me, but she didn't push. Instead, she gave me extra materials, books that weren't part of the curriculum, access to research databases the college subscribed to. "If you ever want to tell me the real reason," she said once, "I'm a good listener. Maybe someday I would, but not yet." Not until I had proof that I wasn't crazy, that what happened in Kashar was real, and that whatever we found in those tunnels was connected to something bigger, something that was still out there. 5 years after waking up in that hospital in Germany, I still didn't have answers, but I had theories, research, and a wall full of evidence, and I was getting closer. I could feel it. I lived alone on the western edge of Montana in a cabin that sat 20 miles from the nearest town. No neighbors, just pine trees and mountains and quiet. The isolation wasn't an accident. After what happened in Kashar, being around people felt wrong, like I was carrying something contagious. My morning routine stayed the same. Wake up at 500, make coffee, check the satellite phone for messages from Kingston. Kingston Bush worked intelligence analysis at the Pentagon, though he never confirmed that directly. He was my only official contact, sending me weekly updates on missing persons in remote locations. The patterns were there if you knew how to look: clusters of disappearances near caves, old mining operations, archaeological digs. Places where the ground opened up. The wall above my desk held 5 years of research. Newspaper clippings, printouts of geological surveys, photographs of stone markings from sites around the world. Red string connected related incidents. I added another pin to the map. 3 hikers gone missing near Glacier National Park last week. Right where an old copper mine had collapsed in the 1930s. Kingston's latest message read, "Nothing new on your inquiry. Official position unchanged." Which meant the Department of Defense was still pretending none of it happened, that I made it all up, that my entire team hadn't disappeared in those tunnels. I grabbed my backpack and headed out to my truck. Tuesdays and Thursdays meant driving 90 minutes to Missoula for Professor Morales' class on ancient writing systems. The government wanted me quiet, but they couldn't stop me from learning. The lecture hall was nearly empty when I arrived, just how I liked it. I took my usual seat in the back corner where I could watch the door and still see the board. Professor Morales was already writing on the whiteboard, her hair pulled into a loose bun, colorful scarf draped around her neck despite the warm classroom. "Raymond," she smiled when she saw me. "Early as always. Military habits die hard, "Yes, ma'am." I set my notebook on the desk, along with photocopies of the symbols I'd been trying to decipher for years. "How are those translations coming?" She walked over, glasses sliding down her nose as she peered at my work. "Slowly." I pointed to a curved mark that looked like a crescent moon with 3 lines cutting through it. "This one shows up in both Sumerian and Proto-Elamite texts, but with different meanings. That's because they're not related languages despite geographical proximity." Madison pulled up a chair, excitement lighting her face the way it always did when discussing ancient writing. "The visual similarity is coincidental, or perhaps they both borrowed from an even older source." "An older source?" My pulse jumped. That's what I was looking for. Something older, something that connected everything. "Well, that's the holy grail for linguistic archaeologists, isn't it? Finding the mother tongue," she laughed. "But more likely, these are just examples of convergent evolution in written language. The human brain tends towards certain patterns." 2 other students walked in, and Madison returned to the front of the room. I tried to pay attention as she lectured on logographic versus alphabetic systems, but my mind kept drifting back to those tunnels, to the walls covered in markings that pulsed with blue light when the girl, Jessica, had touched them. I copied everything from the board mechanically, knowing I'd review it later when my head was clearer. What mattered was building my knowledge base, understanding what I'd seen, what I'd been chosen to remember. The nightmares came most nights. Always the same, walking through winding tunnels that stretched and contracted like they were breathing. Darkness that moved, that had weight and substance, and voices speaking in languages that existed before human throats could form words. I woke up gasping, sheets soaked with sweat. 3:17 a.m. glowed red on my bedside clock. Too early to start the day, too late to hope for more sleep. I swung my feet to the floor and froze. My hands were stained black. I switched on the lamp. Charcoal dust covered my fingers, embedded under my nails. My stomach dropped as I looked around the room. The walls next to my bed were covered with drawings, symbols identical to those from the chamber walls in Kashar. This had happened before, 6 times in the past year. Each time I'd take photos of the markings before washing them away, adding them to my research. The doctors had called it parasomnia, a sleep behavior disorder brought on by PTSD. But I knew better. Something was using me, using my hands while my conscious mind slept. I grabbed my camera and methodically photographed each symbol, then scrubbed my hands raw in the bathroom sink. As the water ran black, I stared at my reflection, the deep shadows under my eyes, the gray creeping into my hair at 37. Harbinger, she had called me. The last word Jessica spoke before the ground split open between us. Before the blue light vanished and darkness swallowed everything except me. What was I meant to herald? What message was I supposed to carry? By morning, I'd already been up for hours, pinning the new photographs to my research wall. I added notes about recurring patterns, cross-referenced with similar markings from archaeological sites in Peru, Turkey, and Western China. The coffee pot had run dry twice already. My satellite phone buzzed. Kingston. Hanson, got something that might interest you. Email incoming. I opened my laptop. The attachment contained a geological survey from northern Alaska. A team mapping permafrost melt had discovered an underground chamber with markings similar to those I'd described in my debriefing 5 years ago. The report was flagged as classified. "How did you get this?" I asked when I called him back. "Don't ask questions you don't want answers to," Kingston said. "This was buried deep. Someone's trying to connect dots without telling anyone what picture they're making. Any missing persons reports from the area? Not yet. But the survey team reported equipment failures. Compasses spinning, GPS giving impossible readings. Sound familiar?" My mouth went dry. "Yeah, it does." After hanging up, I stared at the wall of evidence I'd built. Newspaper clippings about strange disappearances. Maps showing geological anomalies. My own crude drawings of the chamber where I'd lost my team. All of it pointing to something ancient and patient. Something that had been waiting beneath the earth for longer than humans had existed. Jessica had let me live. She touched my forehead with fingers that burned like ice, looked into my eyes with pupils that reflected no light, and decided I should carry this knowledge back to the surface. At the time, I thought she'd shown mercy. Now I wondered if surviving had been the crueler fate. Late afternoon sunlight slanted through the cabin windows as I organized my files. 5 years of research filled 3 filing cabinets and spilled onto every flat surface. I'd created a timeline of incidents dating back to the earliest archaeological records. Cave paintings in France that showed figures being pulled into the earth. Babylonian clay tablets describing those who dwell beneath. Medieval accounts of entire villages vanishing overnight. Whatever waited in those tunnels had been taking people for thousands of years. And something told me it was building towards something bigger. I felt it in my bones, a certainty growing stronger each day. Something was coming. Something connected to what happened in those tunnels. And I was the only one who knew, the only one who could warn others. The harbinger, carrying knowledge no one wanted to hear. I picked up the small wooden box where I kept the only physical evidence I'd escaped with. A fragment of stone that had broken off in my pocket during the collapse. Under certain light, faint blue lines still crawled across its surface like living things. I survived to tell this story. But some days, watching the symbols appear on my walls at night, feeling the weight of knowledge no one else carried, I wondered if bearing this burden was really survival at all.